Gotta absolutely love that intro. I just imagine Song a Day Man walking out to that, to Gary Gensler's office as he drops the lawsuit papers on his table. What's good, Adam? What's good, Adam? How you feeling?
Good, man. I'm excited for this one to get into this. I actually didn't do much research because I wanted to kind of come at it with fresh eyes for our listeners and stuff too, to be able to kind of dive into the details of what's going on here. But obviously, this moved the Twitter needle, man. You say you're suing the SEC, man. This is, obviously got a lot of traction. I think the song sold yesterday. Is that correct, Jonathan? It actually sold yesterday. But yeah, this was big.
Yeah, it sold yesterday.
Yeah, awesome, man. Congrats on that, dude.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not exactly sure where to start. I guess maybe start when you and Brian, I'm sure got together to think about this. Tell us what the impetus was for this.
Yeah. Is there enough room to get Brian up as a speaker, or is there?
He's already up. Yeah, he can speak already.
He's up here.
Oh, he's up. Okay. My thing, it says listener. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, well, for those that don't know me, I'm Jonathan Mann, sometimes known as Song a Day Man. I've been writing a song every day for the last almost 17 years. And since 2022, I've been tokenizing and selling them as NFTs every day as well. Mainly as one-of-ones on Ethereum, mainnet, and then more recently have been getting into just, releasing them as editions elsewhere. And so this really all began with a project that some of you might remember called Stoner Cats. And Stoner Cats, if you don't, or if you need a refresher, was a sort of Ashton Kutcher, Mila Kunis adjacent. Even Vitalik was involved. Chris Rock did a cameo. It was like this NFT project that launched in 2021. The aim of which was to raise money to make 8 episodes of a animated series called Stoner Cats. And people forget, but like they raised like $8 million, I think. It was back in the heady days of the very, very top of the NFT market. There was even like a crazy gas war that happens. If anyone knows Superfizz literally lost like 5 figures in the gas war, trying to mint a fucking stoner cat. So those were some crazy times. So anyway, stoner cats happened, and just like many other projects, price went down, people were unhappy, et cetera, et cetera. But for their part, they did end up making the show. If you own a stoner cat, you can go watch it. That was sort of the idea, is that the stoner cats holders are the ones that can access the show. So that was 2021. Fast forward to September of 2023, and a week before Stoner Cats got their SEC letter, there had been another SEC thing that had happened against impact theory, which I wasn't as familiar with, and frankly, I'm still not super familiar with. So I remember seeing the impact theory thing and thinking to myself, "Whoa, okay, they're doing the thing we've all been a little bit afraid of, which is the SEC is starting to come after NFTs." Then they went after Stoner Cats, and I was like, "What the heck is going on?" Because I knew the Stoner Cats people. I knew that like they, were not, there was nothing untoward about what they were doing. And so I was a little confused as to why they had been attacked by the SEC. And so I remember like specifically reading the entire, and you can go online, it exists. You can go online and read. It's 9 pages. It's, it's not like hard to read at all. It's not like a super technical document. I read through this like action that the SEC took against Stoner Cats, and I kept waiting for the part in what they wrote where I was like waiting for the part where they said like something bad that they did. And I was just reading and reading and reading, and I'm like, I never got to that part because that part literally didn't exist.
Yeah.
They accused Stoner Cats of selling unregistered securities. And I'm relatively sure that most people here, know what the idea of a security, the Howey test, all that. If you read through the complaint from the SEC against Stoner Cats, you will not find really one iota of actual evidence offered as to what explains them saying that these things are securities. So I got really angry. I was like, this is wild. This not only is wild because, they're taking this action against them. They have to pay $1 million fine. They have to destroy their NFTs. Like, all of that is bad. Even worse, this action that they've taken implicates every single one of us. Every single one of us that is making and selling NFTs, we are implicated by this action that they took against Stoner Cats. And that does not bode well. And so that day I wrote a song called "This Song is a Security." It ended up being like my second highest selling song ever. And sort of as a result of that song, I started to think seriously about like what would be the avenue if I actually wanted to sort of do something about this. And it was around that time that I started to think about Brian, because Brian has been on this journey for a long time, and I can sort of let Brian take it from there. But yeah, that's how it started, and sort of that's how we hooked up together.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we've known Brian now for probably going on almost 2 years, talking about IP and all these different kind of issues around NFTs. And I think with the impact theory, if I'm remembering correctly, they basically just paid the fine. And I remember being at the time really disappointed because I know that the guy who, is in charge of that or runs that channel or whatever, that main dude, I mean, he's like a deca millionaire guy. And if there was one guy I thought would have like pushed back and maybe fought for it, that guy would have, but I understand not wanting to tie yourself up in court for years either, and that headache and nightmare that goes along with it. But lawyers like doing that sort of stuff. So Brian, welcome on stage, man. I appreciate you for joining us. And yeah, if you want to give us a little more context here, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Yeah. So to the point you're just making, I mean, I too am disappointed that people were settling those cases with the SEC, because I think they were really weak ones that they could have fought effectively, especially Cats. But, from their perspective, right, I mean, that kind of would have been throwing good money after bad, right? And the project was over. There wasn't any more revenue coming in. If they won, it would have been a moral victory, but they still would have had to pay their lawyers. So I kind of understand why they were willing to settle, because the $1 million settlement was, for better or worse, probably less than it would have cost them to defend themselves against the SEC in that economic fight. Almost certainly less than it would have cost them to defend themselves effectively against the SEC in an action like that. So part of the idea here, and I think part of the reason that I think what Jonathan and I are doing is important, is that we're not in it because we're worried about future revenue. Well, we are worried about future revenue streams, but we're not going to knuckle under to the SEC here, right? I mean, this is, we're bringing the war to them, not the other way around, and I think that really changes the game for them. So for me, in a lot of ways, this is the culmination of something like a 15 plus year project that really started for me back when I was a very junior securities lawyer at the white shoe law firm Sullivan and Cromwell on Wall Street, working on securities defense for people against the SEC, and doing a lot of research into kind of what I would say the ontology of securities, right? In other words, that deep question: what is a security? What should we think about? What should we be worrying about? These kind of very abstract questions. And like many securities lawyers, before going to law school, I went to art school. And so while I was doing a lot of this work, I couldn't help but notice that the SEC's definition of security looked an awful lot, if you kind of squinted in the right way, looked an awful lot like contemporary art. Specifically, it looked a lot like conceptual art, right? So conceptual art consists of a concept rather than a particular concrete art object. And so the way the art market transacts in conceptual art is with certificates. Right, so a conceptual artist creates a conceptual artwork by dreaming it up, then they make a bunch of certificates and sell the conceptual artwork in the form of editions represented by ownership of a certificate to their collectors. And I thought to myself, well, gee, a certificate of ownership of a work of conceptual art looks an awful lot like a stock certificate. How's it really any different from that? And I thought for a long time about how to kind of make that observation in a kind of formal academic context. It wasn't really coming up with a kind of satisfying, I guess, way of doing it. It wasn't until many years later, so I was a law professor and teaching a bunch of classes, that I realized what I needed to do in order to make the project make sense was to kind of activate it, as it were, to kind of turn it from just being a paper into being a conceptual art project itself. So what I did was create an artwork that I called the SEC No Action Letter Request, which consisted of me sending a no action letter request to the SEC, proposing to sell this work of conceptual art that I'd constructed to satisfy all the criteria of being a security, under the SEC's so-called Howey test that it uses for, at least supposedly uses for determining whether or not something is something that it can regulate, whether a transaction is something it can regulate. And I sent it to the SEC, explained to them why the conceptual artwork I was proposing to sell satisfied all their criteria, and essentially dared them to explain to me why they couldn't regulate, they weren't going to regulate. And no, not now. I'm sorry, we can't. Okay. So that didn't really go anywhere. I mean, it was a fun project, but then a few years later, the NFT market came around, and I realized, oh wow, this is perfect. Like I can use this market to really illustrate why what I'm talking about really makes sense. You know, before they said this isn't a security because you're not actually selling it. I said, well, you know, now I can sell it, and I did. And I came back to them and said, you know, well, tell me again, you know, why what I'm doing isn't selling an unregistered security. They still didn't have an answer. So, you know, for me, this lawsuit is essentially bringing that question back to the SEC for a third time and telling them, hey, you know, you really need to think about what you actually think that, or what you actually want to claim that you're able to regulate. Because based on what you've been saying all these years, the entire art market is a securities market. And it shouldn't matter whether you're selling artwork in physical form or digital form, it's still selling art. And so, you know, there's just no way that you can coherently argue that you have the regulatory authority to tell people that they're not allowed to sell their artwork.
And isn't it so, I guess not ironic, but so, yeah, disappointing is the word you use a lot, that like they ignored you for so long for bringing this up. And then, you know, years later, they go after Stoner Cats for the exact thing that you had been bringing up to them all this time.
Yeah, I think
It's
that's like, I mean, a big part of the issue here is that the SEC really wants to choose its defendants, right? So they want to choose defendants that they feel comfortable they can characterize, even if kind of disingenuously, in ways that makes them look kind of bad, whether or not the formal differences are really substantial. And they want to choose defendants who they don't think are going to fight back.
So I have a question about kind of the, you know, the bulk of this filing, or, you know, this lawsuit. As you mentioned, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of potential, you know, NFT collections or artworks that could have led this filing. Did you choose, you know, to lead with the Stoner Cat situation because you felt that's the best opportunity to set precedents with moving forward with this lawsuit?
I mean, I think the thing about Stoner Cats is it's really the SEC sticking its neck out the very farthest, because I think in the Stoner Cats action, the SEC really struggled to articulate what specifically it was that made what Stoner Cats was doing, issuing an unregistered security, as opposed to selling artwork, right? So it focused on a lot of kind of peripheral or potential aspects of the project that has never actually materialized, well, kind of dancing around what the Stoner Cats project actually did, which was sell NFTs, telling people that, you know, in fact, we think our project is going to be successful, and if it's successful, your NFT might be more valuable in the future. Well, that's literally what every artist ever has always done, right? They sell artwork. They say, buy my artwork because you think it's cool. And if you're lucky, I'm going to be more popular in the future. And if I'm more popular in the future and people think I'm a really cool and excellent artist, then they're going to want to buy my artwork then. And the artwork you bought is going to be more valuable in the future. It's literally exactly the same thing. There's no gap between, you can't slip a piece of paper between the two. Right. So for the project I'm actually proposing in this lawsuit, which is that I am describing in this lawsuit with the intention of creating, should we get the declaratory judgment action that we're looking for, it's titled Cryptographic Tokens of Material Financial Benefit. And if you read through the description of the project or the conceptual artwork that I'm proposing to sell, you'll notice that it has distinctive similarities to the Stoner Cats project.
Very cool. What would be like your ideal outcome? And obviously these things can take years, but what would be the ideal outcome where you would, claim kind of full victory? Would be what would it look like?
I mean, I think that's a great question, and it's kind of hard to predict, especially at this point, what exactly is going to happen, especially because the SEC's response to our lawsuit at this point, a week after filing, has uniformly been no comment. So we really have no idea what the SEC is going to do. At this point, the most likely thing they're going to do first is to file a motion to dismiss, probably on jurisdictional grounds, which I think is going to be tough for them to win on, because I think we pleaded jurisdiction pretty convincingly, both jurisdiction and standing, especially because I've sent these no action letter requests to them in the past. So on record asking for permission, and they're on record not responding. So I think it's going to be really hard for them to kick the lawsuit on kind of formal procedural grounds. They're still likely to file a motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim, essentially arguing that this fits within our regulatory authorities, so we can just do that. And I think that would be great, right? If they did that, then it would give us an opportunity to respond on the merits to the SEC in court and get a federal district court to opine on whether selling art is a security simply because you do it in digital form or not. And it's always an open question what the court's going to do. I think it would be I have a hard time seeing a district court finding for the SEC. I mean, maybe it's just me. I have a hard time seeing a district court saying, yes, the SEC is allowed to regulate the art market. I just don't see that happening. Right.
I can say for me, like my hope, and it's fun doing this with Brian, because Brian and then our lawyer Jason Gottlieb, will go to town on all these like legal theories and things, and it's very fascinating to listen to. For me, from a more sort of layman point of view, like the success state for me is simply that if we win in some way, that win makes making NFTs safer for everybody else. And if there's anybody out there, and I know that there are people who have projects that they want to do, are always having to like sort of second guess themselves and wonder, like, this will be just one. We have a lot of notches especially in NFTs right now. We really only have notches in the column of like making things more scary to do. And my hope would be that if we win, it is a notch in the like, okay, well, like Brian said, this district court or maybe even this federal court has weighed in and has made this pronouncement. So it's safe for me to, release my 10K project that I've been thinking about, or, my crazy NFT experiment that I want to be doing. It's really about like, ideally making things safer for the space.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually think there's a very real possibility that the SEC could just say, okay, fine, right? Like, we agree those aren't projects that we think we can or should be regulating, and therefore we're not gonna oppose this.
How would that look? For example, and my brain just goes to how long these things tend to take. But let's just imagine, okay, Trump gets elected, change over in the highest levels of the SEC. I mean, would that be something where they would just send you a letter and then basically end the case that way? Or how would that actually look from like a legal standpoint? If what you're describing, I mean, assuming it doesn't happen with the current administration, but if it were to happen with the next administration, if we get a change of administration, what would that look like for me? Yeah.
It's a great question. I mean, I think it really depends. It wouldn't just be a letter to us. It would have to be a letter to the court too, effectively saying that we're not going to oppose this declaratory judgment action. It would kind of be similar in a lot of ways to the SEC agreeing to a no action letter request. I mean, it would kind of be the judicial equivalent of that, probably. The SEC saying, or the court essentially saying the SEC has agreed that it's not going to pursue an action against these two projects and draw inferences from that. And that would be, precedential as against the SEC, at least to some degree. I mean, district court rulings aren't precedential, but it would be as precedential effectively as a no action letter would be. Now, if a court wanted to, it could also issue an opinion or something along those lines, expounding upon what it had said. It wouldn't necessarily have to, but I think it would at least offer some comfort and make it very, very difficult for the SEC to come back later and say, no, we changed our mind and we're going to go after this after all. I think that would be very awkward for them to do that. So they kind of have to accept that this is something we're going to kind of identify as being outside the scope of what we can regulate. The reason I think that that's a very real possibility is that as it stands, there's already, I think, a strong minority of SEC commissioners who think that. And they only have to peel off really one more commissioner to agree to get the SEC to say, hey, we've kind of stuck our neck out too far. We're leading with our chin here. This is a bad idea. We should be more cautious about how extensively we assert our regulatory authority.
On a personal kind of question, which is I kind of understand why Jonathan would want to pursue this, because it's like, this is like perfect song fodder for the next 2 years for him. But for you, assuming you're the one who's going to have to actually do like the lifting or the heavy lifting of actually like doing this, legal work, what would make you want to do it? Is this for legacy?
Yeah.
What is this for you?
Well, this is kind of the perfect situation for me, right? Because, I've been begging the SEC to like engage these observations and arguments I've been making for, 5+ years now. And they've refused to do it. And now I find myself in a situation where I've got, a kind of first rank securities lawyer with the support of a securities law firm and local counsel in Louisiana doing all the grunt work for me. And I just get to go on Twitter Spaces and talk about it. I mean, my job is PR, not writing the legal briefs, which is great, right? I mean, it couldn't be any better, right? So for me, this is really an ideal situation, right? I get to test out a lot of these legal theories that I've been pushing that, for years people have been saying, oh, quote, that's fanciful, or that's not real, or that's not really a security, or that's not really a problem, or even better, right? The SEC would never actually do that. And I just kept on saying, yeah, it is. Yeah, there's no question that it's a security. And yes, the SEC is inevitably going to do this. So when they did, when they brought these actions against impact theory and center cats, I feel like I had a really big I told you so moment, right? Because I saw that coming a long time ago. I felt like it was inevitable, and I was trying to like play Pollyanna, and no one would listen.
So is the law firm in Louisiana you're working with, are they doing this pro bono, or are you guys just financing it out of your own pocket?
We can't really talk about the financing, but the lawsuit is funded, and the law firms are all getting paid.
Oh, interesting. That's
And,
interesting.
I should say our lawyer.
I was gonna say this feels like something where you could have done a raise.
Yeah.
Like this, you could have done a raise on this one.
Yeah. I don't think we would have gone into it. That I think that would have felt a little too exposed to go into it that way. But I just want to say, our lawyer Jason Gottlieb, is quite well known in the crypto lawyer space, and has handled a ton of cases especially recently, and has gotten some really great rulings out of courts. If you Google his name and just look at the stuff that he's been up to. I'm not sure if he's here. He might be somewhere in the audience.
Yeah, he really to be more
hanging his head in shame and
to be more
how much
specific,
we're saying that we're not supposed to say. But
to be more specific than Jonathan, Jason showed the SEC its ass not very long ago, and is basically single-handedly responsible for the SEC shutting down its Utah office in shame. So they're definitely paying attention to him.
Yeah, he's one to watch. And not for nothing, but like I've seen so many lawyers talk specifically about how great the complaint is that Jason and his team wrote, just as a sort of piece of law artifact, that it as a complaint in itself is uniquely good. I can't really, I don't have much to compare it to, but all the lawyers that I've been seeing. So that's just to give him and his team, the biggest shout out of all.
Yeah, 100%. It's a really intellectually and theoretically sophisticated complaint. And I think the SEC is really going to struggle with how to respond to this, because I don't think that they have really appealing responses to the arguments that we're making. And, it's not surprising to me that their response so far has been no comment, because I'm not sure they know how to comment.
So I have here pulled up on the live stream, the CoinDesk article that they wrote about you guys. Says, does the SEC really have jurisdiction over NFT art? As we discussed early in the conversation, you led with the lawsuit with Stoner Cats, right? Which is art, but also had, some other utility aspects to it. If this moves forward and you have to go to basically explain this or to, take it to court, is there a possibility that the NFTs have to be segmented into different categories, or are you are you going about this in a way that NFTs are NFTs is the technology and not just NFTs, the specific use case for each category?
So, I think I can speak to that. And there's something actually that I've been trying to kind of get out there to the NFT and crypto community more broadly in terms of thinking about securities law, right? People talk a lot about the Howey tests, right? And they say, the Howey test, 4-factor Howey test tells you whether or not something's a registered security, right? The SEC says, we ask whether there's an investment of money in a common enterprise, the expectation of profits from the efforts of others. I actually think that's really missing the point, right? The Howey test isn't really a test at all. In fact, it's totally empty. And literally anything you want to call a security can be placed within the scope of the Howey test if you just describe it in the right way. And I think the problem with that way of looking at the issue is that it misses the point of Howey itself, right? The key language to me in Howey is not, this is the 4-factor Howey test. The key language in Howey is the Supreme Court saying, we don't look at how you describe the transaction. We look at the economic reality of the transaction. And that's in fact what Howey itself was about, right? Howey was about somebody trying to characterize an investment in an orange orchard as buying an orange orchard. And the SEC and the court ultimately effectively said, look, you can't transform an investment into not a security simply by waving your hands and describing it in the right way. We're going to look at the nature of the actual transaction that you're proposing. So I think all we're really saying in this lawsuit is if it looks like art and it smells like art and you're selling it as art, then it's art. And that's all it really takes. And are there other kinds of ways of characterizing NFTs that might actually fall within the scope of the securities laws? Sure, because the securities laws are written to encompass anything that, the economic reality of which is being a security. So if you try to describe something that is in fact legitimately characterized as a securities transaction as not being one and simply sell it along with an NFT, well, that's still going to be a securities transaction. But if what you're doing is fundamentally selling art, then it's art, right? Now, of course, there's always this response, oh, slippery slope. How could the SEC know for sure? Blah, blah, blah. My response is, look, the art market existed before the SEC was created, right? So for the entire existence of the SEC, it's somehow magically been able to distinguish between what's art and what is a security. So I'm pretty confident that it's going to keep being able to do that in the future. It's been doing it for 90 years. It can keep doing it going forward. This is transparently something the SEC is capable of doing because it's always done it.
They've gotten somehow very confused by the existence of the blockchain. The mere existence of the blockchain has thrown them into deep disarray in terms of being able to make that those distinctions.
Yeah, and the reason I think that that's such an important observation that Jason is making is that the blockchain and the way the art market works are fundamentally identical, especially when it comes to NFTs, right? Because the art market as a market is literally based on provenance, right? It's about ownership of effectively an entry in a catalog raising, entry in a database. When you buy an artwork, what you're really buying is an entry in a database, and the object is just represents ownership of that entry in a database. So, I like to say, an artwork, traditional artwork, is just a physical token. And all the NFT market does is replace the physical token with the digital token. And that can't be a salient difference for determining whether or not something is a security.
One question along those lines is the kind of, I don't know, moving goalposts thing, which it feels like they might do, is say, okay, well, if it's an art NFT, that's fine, but all others not fine. But then of course it's like it's left to them to determine, God help us, what is art, right? So I don't know. It just feels like that's always the kind of slope where they may. I mean, have you guys like legally boxed them into a corner where they wouldn't be able to actually like move the goalposts in that sort of way? If you know what I'm saying. I don't know if I'm making sense here.
I think hopefully, right? So like I said, the project that I'm proposing is a work of conceptual art titled Cryptographic Tokens of Material Financial Benefit. And the artwork is the concept of selling nothing to people, right? And so there's no physical object, there's no image, there's no nothing. It's just the idea of selling things.
Yeah. Did you get that name from Mitchell Chan? Did you pull off of his?
Yes, I plagiarized it. I intentionally plagiarized it from Mitch.
Yeah, it feels like it. Yeah, that's awesome, man. I love that. Which he also plagiarized, so it's all good. It's plagiarism all the way down. This is what art is, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, and honestly, in both Mitch's case and in the case of the work that he was responding to by Yves Klein, right? Both of those works were thinking about the nature of the art market and the nature of selling artwork and the art experience. And so I really wanted to engage in dialogue kind of conceptually with Klein and Chan by asking the question about like what happens when we take the idea of engaging with the art market as an aesthetic experience and switch out the art market with the securities market.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way that you guys are going about this. From a timeline perspective, let's say that this plays out and that the case is accepted and you go battle it out in court. How long do you think this can actually last? And what do you think the percentage is of some sort of agreement, right? Or I guess settlement coming through if this is kind of seen mostly through the kind of early stages?
Litigation is very slow, right? So the SEC has no obligation to respond to our complaint for at least 60 days, and they can ask for an extension, which the court is almost certain to grant. If and when they do respond, we're going to have to respond to that. Then the court has, as long as it wants, essentially, to decide whatever initial motions. Then there's an answer, then there's discovery, and litigation is really slow and can take years and years and years. So it's at this point in time, it's really hard to say. I think it's going to depend a lot on the SEC's appetite to really pursue this particular action.
Yeah, at that point, the crypto space moves so fast. Technologies continue to change, right? Also, too, in terms of NFTs, maybe this is a little bit more of a nuanced question. NFTs, the technology, I think in this frame of reference exists to Ethereum. Does this exist to quote unquote NFTs that exist on Bitcoin or Solana or XYZ blockchain, even though the technicals of it may be slightly different, but the idea of an NFT, right, just putting data on a blockchain, do you think this case would include assets from other chains or all chains?
It seems to me almost certainly. I mean, if whatever they decide applies to our project specifically, just because they're on Ethereum, I don't see why they wouldn't apply to everything else.
Our claims are entirely platform agnostic. It wouldn't make any difference unless, I guess I would hedge that by saying, if there were a chain that had some unspecified characteristics that were radically different from any other blockchain with respect to hosting NFTs, I guess conceivably there could be features that would make it not a good fit with the arguments that we're making. But as far as I'm aware, the claims we're making are general enough that they would apply to any blockchain on which people are hosting NFTs.
Man, it's very cool. I really applaud you guys for doing this. It feels like this almost should have happened in 21. But sometimes these things, especially with legal stuff, take years for people to get together. I'm actually really psyched that it's you guys to do it. Obviously Brian, having talked to you, I don't know, half a dozen times on spaces about various legal issues around NFTs. I think getting some clarity. It finally feels like actually the entire crypto space is moving into this. Like, we need clarity. We're pushing for clarity. And it's really good to see, usually it's the big players, Coinbase and stuff pushing back, but to see, a lawyer we respect, really take it to him it's awesome, man. Thank you guys so much for joining us here on the space. I don't know, Jake, if you had any other questions, or if anybody wants to jump up and has further questions, of course, raise your hand. You're welcome to come up and ask some questions.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I first off, I really appreciate you saying that. That means a lot to me. And second, I agree with you. It would have been great if this could have happened a while back. However, I think that until the SEC really led with its chin against impact theory, and in particular stoner cats, there just really wasn't a hook that was going to make a court take this seriously. So I think in a lot of ways, it took the SEC kind of taking that move that Jonathan was talking about as really being this kind of flabbergasting, how do you distinguish this from everything else that we're doing, to make this lawsuit really a viable one. Because without that, I think a court would have said, well, there's no indication that they're planning to actually do this. And so, there's no reason for us to entertain a declaratory judgment action. Now we can point at stoner cats and say, look, the SEC is in fact doing this, and they're not getting challenged, and we want to be the people bringing that challenge against what they're doing, because it's threatening not just our livelihoods but also our First Amendment speech.
Very very good point. Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, obviously applaud you guys for what you're doing. This is incredible. What is kind of the best way to leverage, the industry and the communities that we have here? Doesn't really seem like you're taking donations. Seems like just kind of you against, enemy number one. What is kind of the best way that the community and industry can kind of support you going forward?
I think the most important thing for us is getting the word out about the lawsuit and getting people thinking about the ideas and the arguments that we're advancing. So honestly, the best thing that could happen would be for people to talk about what we're doing. And if journalists or people with a platform who could spread the word more effectively, to kind of encourage them to talk about it. as well, because I think the main issue here is putting the pressure on the SEC, so it can no longer feel like no comment is an adequate response to what we're saying. I think we want people to be asking the question, why is the SEC doing this? What does it think it's doing? And why does it think that this is appropriate for it to be doing? And how does it respond to the challenges that are being levied against it?
Good point. Good point. So I have a question. Maybe it's not as much a question about the lawsuit, but more a question about Jonathan and your creative process. And, you know, as you as the person who's kind of leading, you know, the lawsuit, first, you know, creating a song a day for 16 years, I think is quite incredible. My first question here is more just like, why do you continue to do this every single day? You know, what is that creative process? And, you know, how impactful has you know, creating one song a day for 16 years really been on your life?
Well, that's a big question.
We're trying to humanize you a little bit, right?
Insane, right,
Yeah,
John?
yeah. Well, you know, so for context, right? Like I'm 42 years old. I started when I was 26. You know, that's like a lot of life that's happened in between starting and now. When I started, I didn't have the idea that it was going to be an ongoing thing. It was only supposed to go for a month. I was unemployed and living in Berkeley, California at the time. And then I just, at the end of the month, I decided to keep going, and I went for 365 days. And, you know, once I did a year, it's just became ever harder to stop, I guess, in a lot of ways, where it's like, I thought about stopping at 2000. My first kid was born around song 2000. And I had this feeling of like, oh, you know, 2000 is a good round number. My first kid is just born. Maybe I should stop. And then I woke up on 2001. I just like wrote another song. I'm like, well, shit, like I'm just going to keep going now. Then at a certain point, it just became clear that like this is just what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. I don't really know when I made that decision or how, but my wife like jokes that in the early on in our relationship, like I would occasionally talk about like maybe I should stop at some point, and then I never did, and she would always like make fun of me for it. So that's an answer to that. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. You know, Song a Day is a lot of things. It's like a journal in some ways. A project like this, Suing the SEC, is sort of it fits really well within the sort of wider Song a Day spectrum of just like I like to seek out weird, and sometimes just weird things just happen as a result of Song a Day. You know, I wrote this song. This song is a security because I was pissed about Senator Cats, and that's like what sort of set me down the path to, you know, to suing the SEC. If you want to go back even further, it's like I got interested in NFTs in 2017, way back before they were a thing, specifically because of how they could relate to Song a Day. You know, like a friend of mine showed me CryptoPunks like not long after they launched, and that was this sort of aha moment of like seeing how CryptoPunks and Song a Day were similar. You know, this one collection that had thousands of things in it. I'm like, and it exists on the blockchain. I'm like, wow, what is that? So, you know, if you think about that domino meme of like the tiny domino going to the big domino, it's like Jonathan gets interested in, you know, CryptoPunks in 2017, and then Jonathan sues the SEC or whatever. These things kind of lead into each other. Yeah, I don't know. You can ask me other specific questions about Song a Day, but you know, obviously I could talk about it forever because it's my life's work, and it's you know, sprawling.
Yeah, it is interesting to hear that, you know, it's really your journal, you know, the life story, but also found most interesting is that you engage in certain things to kind of continue the story and kind of build out that narration. Going back to when you found crypto or NFTs in 2017, How impactful was that on your life? You mentioned you saw a lot of parallels, right, between Song a Day and CryptoPunks, but what type of paradigm shift really was that? And yeah, and then, you know, after you started tokenizing your songs, and then as NFTs became more popular, you know, how has that changed, you know, Song a Day?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I see Judy's here in the audience, you know, like the Judy Mam from, you know, NYC, which is like another one of these very early um, NFT projects. And Dada, you know, hosted like a meetup in early 2018. That was like the first meetup that I went to in New York City. And NFTs were definitely not a thing, and they were such not a thing that most people in crypto even didn't know or care about what NFTs were, and we were a very, very small community, and there were many years all the way up through the beginning of 2021 when it was not given. It was like not a sure thing whether or not NFTs would even matter to anybody, and it actually feels a lot like that now again, where we're in this moment where it seems like it's similar. If you really reminds me of that time where it's like, you know, there's more people creating NFTs than want to collect them, and it's like, is did we have a moment, and is it ever going to come back? And it's unclear. But you know, having been through that time and having come into it so early and been so, yeah, just so fascinated by both the technology, but then also the kind of people that I met, like Judy and Skrilla and all the early people who were in the space. It really did change. It completely changed the trajectory of Song a Day. You know, I tokenized the second ever song to be tokenized. The first one was Skrilla on Bitcoin using the colored coins, and the second song ever tokenized was the song that I did at DevCon in 2018 with Vitalik on stage, where I was like listing out all of these different roadmaps for Ethereum that failed, and every time I would list one, Vitalik would go, "That didn't work," and that was like the very first song that was ever tokenized on Ethereum. Way back when, and it sold for like, you know, 2.5 ETH, which was like $500, you know, and that felt so cool and new and different. And, you know, really wasn't until 2021 that I was able to ride the wave that everyone else had suddenly caught up to, this idea of NFTs, where I was able to really like build the thing that I'd had in my mind the whole time, which is like, you know, tokenizing all of Song a Day, all of the past Song a Days, and then going into the future, tokenizing Song a Day, you know, for forever. And, you know, in a I can talk about like in a logistical way, I keep like a really like massive spreadsheet now of all the traits of each song. So like that's a thing that I never did prior to crypto. And then, you know, it's always lived on YouTube, but now I have this whole process of like I tokenize it and it goes live, and it's like a whole Rube Goldberg machine that's like that exists now to get Song a Day onto the blockchain, into all the different places where it goes. It's really neat. You know, composable money, composable Legos, things like that. But from a just living point of view, you know, my dream at the very beginning of the sort of journey thinking about the blockchain was, you know, what if I could put out my song every day and somebody would like buy it, you know, would buy the song. And I was like, if I could make, you know, like $100 a day doing that, that would be, you know, really cool. You know, and that's basically come true. You know, every day I mint my song, and people bid on it on my website, and people mint the editions, and you know, it does, just like anything, like it doesn't look exactly like how I imagined, but it's very very similar. And that's always what I hoped it would be, which is that, like, to make Song a Day itself the only thing that I need to be doing. Whereas prior, you know, I had all these other sort of, they were all music related, but it's like, you know, I had the Patreon that I had to do, and I had like ad revenue, and I was doing conference gigs where I'd get up and sing a song at a conference or whatever. And all that was fine, but what I imagined NFTs could be was a way to like just write my song every day and sell it, and that's what I'm doing, and that's always been sort of like the goal.
It's so cool, and because I talk to people all the time, right, about this sort of stuff. It's just at a conference, Bitcoin Nashville, and people will, you know, ask me, well, when music NFTs? I'm like, well, do you know Song a Day Man? Because he's already doing it.
It's happening.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think that NFTs, I believe that NFTs or something like them are the future of the creative economy. Because until the digital revolution, we relied on copyright. And copyright was about the scarcity of physical copies of works of authorship. But in a digital connected world, there is no more scarcity. And copyright is fundamentally obsolete. We just kind of haven't come to accept it yet. What's scarce in our world is commercial goodwill or clout. Right. And NFTs, to my mind, are a way of enabling all artists, not just artists participating in the conventional art market, of monetizing clout. And I think that's the future of the creative economy, because copyright just isn't cutting it for people anymore.
You know, perfect example of that is like, over the years, I've gone viral so many times, you know, and, you know, I've been on national television, like all of these things. And never have I been able, you know, the problem with going viral is that you don't know when you're going to go viral. And so you're like, you have no way to capitalize. You know, I can't like make a t-shirt of the thing that's going viral right as it's going viral. It's like, it doesn't really work. The moment is over before it began. With NFTs, you know, I make a song about suing the NFT that goes viral, and, you know, it sells for 4.6 ETH, and I've made like a bunch of money. So it's like that kind of instant tokenability of the thing. And like what Brian was saying, I wish that I could like convey to people who hate NFTs, especially like my normie friends, like just how like really actually cool they are. Of like, it's not, we're not dealing in scarcity. We're dealing in like, the thing can still be everywhere. The thing is still ubiquitous, but you can also like own this one part of it that doesn't stop anyone else from enjoying it, and support the person that you want to support in a really cool way. Anyway, yeah, it's that part of it is frustrating to me that NFTs got such a bad rap in the normie view.
I think maybe Brian will have to have another space to talk more in depth about copyright is dead, because I do think that's one of the more interesting conversations that I know people are working on it in the crypto space, trying to create something a little bit more robust than just NFTs. But it's a tough problem. Like, if we really want kind of this ownership layer of you know, digital items for social media and all this sort of stuff, it's a challenging problem. But maybe we'll have you back on. We could dive in a little bit deeper about that.
I'd be delighted anytime.
Yeah, I have to say, just you know, as we kind of wrap it up here, hearing, you know, Jonathan's story and the creation of, you know, the creative process and how it intertwines with the tokenization and everything, I think having you as the, you know, the leading person on this lawsuit makes even more sense, you know, to show that there's a whole entire process and that this is your livelihood. And, you know, it makes it seem like it's a, you know, a perfect match. And, you know, I'm honored to have this conversation with both you guys, and look forward to seeing, you know, the progress. I think the community appreciates it as well. So yeah, really thank you guys for having this conversation. Adam, do you have any final words or comments before we wrap it up?
Thanks again, guys. Really appreciate you coming on. Definitely we'll do some more posting about this in the coming weeks and stuff, just to try and get the word out there a little bit more. Although I think you guys did an amazing job already. I mean, I saw it on news programs and pretty much everywhere. So you guys are crushing it. But thanks again, guys. Appreciate you.
You bet. My pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Look forward
Appreciate
to
it.
talking to everyone soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. For those that are new to the show, Adam, myself, and Chris, we work at Emblem Vault, the leading cross-chain NFT protocol in the industry. We host the show Tuesday through Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Tomorrow, we're hosting the Bob team, Build on Bitcoin, one of the popular Bitcoin L2. So we're going to be diving into Bitcoin interoperability and Bitcoin scaling. Until then, Jonathan, really appreciate you for joining us. Make sure everyone who's in the crowd, make sure you follow Brian, follow Jonathan, so you could stay in tune with what's happening with the lawsuit, and then also give the Emblem Vault account a follow at the top left, so you can follow along with all of the spaces that we do 3 times a week, as well as leading the cross-chain evolution and revolution. Until then, everybody, enjoy your Wednesday, and we'll talk soon.